Thank you. Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Parsha class. It's a very short Parsha. It's also a short class. I thought it was important to give a class now. Usually, in a short week like this, a lot of people would not give a Parsha class with the schedule the way it is. But I think there's something in the Parsha that tells us about how to react to the week. We live by the Parsha, some say. I would be amongst those some. And there's reason for it. There's a lot of important lessons we can learn and things we can take away to use in our teshuvah process that we're supposed to be in the midst of these special days. The summary of the Parsha is, there's hardly anything to say, really. Moshe has just finished giving the Jewish people the main instructions of the entire Torah and everything that they should remember for when they settle the land. And then comes Vayelech when Moshe thinks he's done. And Hashem says, wait, you're not done. You have to do a few more things. You have to give over the song. That's the very end of the Parsha, the beginning of Ha'azinu. And you have to give the mitzvah of hakhel, which is every 7 years. The Jewish people would gather, men, women, children, babies, everybody would gather for to hear from the king, read from the Torah or parts of the Torah, from Devarim mostly, and Moshe had to write the Torah that would be used for that, and that's one of the things he does in this week's parsha. That's basically a summary, and now we're going to get into particular psukim in general. It's specifically, right? Generally specific. Okay. Generally specific, I think. Okay. So the one of the first things that happens in the parsha, after Moshe gathers everybody together, he tells them how old he is, which is unique. He says, "Vayomar alehem ben 120 shana anochi." I'm 120 years old. V'lo uchal od l'tzeit lavo. I'm no longer able to go in and out, which is, by the way, a seeming contradiction to something that is said later on, that he was in full vigor when he died. So what does it mean he wasn't able to go in and go out? So Rashi tells us it means he was no longer able. He didn't have permission to go into Eretz Yisrael. Correct. All right. So what's that? Going in and out? I've never heard that. Okay. Maybe it's an expression for doing business. So Moshe is no longer able to do business, maybe? Okay. No longer able to haggle. So actually there is I believe the Gemara says that he was no longer able to learn on the same level. He had all the same, obviously, knowledge, but he wasn't able to, when in learning, you're supposed to be able to debate, to argue. And he didn't have the strength to really argue anymore. So for the Shakla, so his nevuah seemingly was still there. He's about to say Hazina, and he still has some nevuah. He's in that sense, he seems to have been in full vigor. He was still as close to Hashem and knew what Hashem's plan was and everything else. So again, so the verse continues. Hashem amar Eli. Hashem told me lo savor es Yarden. Hashem told me not to pass over the Yarden. Okay, so the first question that I'd like to deal with in detail here is, why does it say his age? Why does it say he's 120? So Rashi says, Hayom mal'u yemei shnosai. That was the end of his years. It became full. In other words, he died by Yom Zeh Nuladati, by Yom Zeh Amut. So the Gemara in Sota Yud Gimel tells us, Rashi quotes here, that on the day that he died was also the day he was born. He died on his birthday. And we extrapolate from that, then what? This is true for all righteous people. They die on their birthday. Right? You've never heard this before? You look confused. All right, so they lived a full life, and so he lived exactly 120 years. So what does that mean? What is this trying to tell us? So Okay. So so dying on his birthday seems to say something about him. Moment. Sorry, technical glitch here. Just want to get rid of that. There we go. Okay. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky, Shlita, writes in Tama Dekra. He writes that Ben Meir Esrim, she quotes this pasuk, and then he asks, so he quotes the rest of the Gemara. It says, "Shakadosh Baruch Hu mimale shnoteihem shel tzadikim miyom liyom." Exactly, day for day, Hashem makes sure that tzadikim die on their birthday. So now he wants to know what's the connection. What does it mean? Why is it important to die on your birthday? Why is that a sign of holiness, of righteousness? So he quotes a Gemara in the Yerushalmi. He says Rosh Hashanah that the Amalek would have this custom of that they would put somebody to war. They would draft their soldiers on their birthdays. So it's kind of like what America does. Right? 18 is when it's your birthday. That's when your numbers come up. In theory, when in times of war, but the Amalek used to do the same thing. On the person's birthday was when they would draft them, and they had a reason for that. Lomar lo b'mehera adam nofel b'yom genusei. Shalom. The person they had this idea that a person would not die on their birthday. So this is the opposite of what we think. So what's going on? So he says Shabiyom liladito shel adam bare betakif mezale lekain kasha shemot ve'oto yom zeh rak bistam. So you would think that if somebody died, they would die in some other random day. Sorry, this copy I have is a little muggy, foggy. So he answers it like this: that what happens is when people are born, when they're really their mazel is up to that point in theory. So that's why if they really wanted their life, if that's what they're living for, they're living to live and enjoy and have fun and party all the time. So their birth is a lucky day for them, per se. So he says that for tzaddikim it's different. Tzaddikim don't really live this world for this world, right? They're living this world knowing that there's an olam haba, knowing that there's a world to come. Obviously, this world is, as the Ramchal writes, is for us to enjoy and for us to do mitzvot in. But the tzaddik doesn't mind death, isn't afraid of death. That's why all of these stories in the Gemara of like the righteous people who are dying and the students come and ask, but why are you crying, Rebbe? And then they say, oh, because of this, because of that. What do you mean, why are they crying? They're about to die. That's why they're crying. So that's never the answer. Right? It's they're not afraid to die. Death is not the reason to live. Death is not the end of life. So that's why to counteract that, tzaddikim die on their birthday, and that's why it's an important lesson from Moshe Rabbeinu here. All right, so we're going to skip a few psukim over to. And this is the rest of the class. I think is going to be rather Seforno heavy. He has a different comment than most everybody else on many of these verses, including this one. It says the Torah in Shlishi, the third aliyah, or Chamishi when they're combined with Nitzavim. Vichtav Moshe et HaTorah Azot. Moshe wrote this Torah. Na el HaKohanim. He gave it to the Kohanim Bnei Levi, the sons of Levi, Anosim et Ha'aron Brit Hashem et Kol Ziknei Yisrael. So he wrote down this Torah, and he gave it to whom? To the Kohanim. So which is weird. Because why should he give the Torah to the Kohanim? They're the only ones teaching Torah? So the Leviim are supposed to be teaching the Torah, but it doesn't say Leviim. He says, B'nai Levi, Hanosim et Aaron, Brit Hashem, so he's El HaKohanim B'nai Levi. So he's giving him to, it sounds like he's giving him to the Kohanim. So first of all, he says that the Torah we're talking about isn't the entire Torah. We're not talking about the entire Torah. So it says the Sforno says Parshat Hamelech shetzava ata likra hakhel. When there's a mitzvah of hakhel, and the king is supposed to read from the Torah. That's the Torah that was given to the Kohanim. He didn't give the entire. He didn't, in other words, write the entire Torah down and give that to the Kohanim, but specifically these psukim. So we know Rashi and Ramban think that take this to mean that he gave the entire Torah, and that was given to the Leviim, and they were entrusted with the Aaron, etc., etc. But we have a problem with that because it doesn't say Leviim; it says Kohanim. So the Sforno says that the Sforno is saying here that the Torah here, it refers to this special section of the hakhel, and that was given to the Kohanim. Why? Because the Mishnah teaches in Sota that the Kohen Gadol was going to hand that scroll over to the king during that ceremony of hakhel, and this is described in the Gemara in Sota 41a. The Kohen would give the Torah to the king, and so when it says this Torah, it means literally the Torah that would be read by the king that was given to the Kohanim. Why? Because the Kohanim would be the ones who would hand it over to the king. So it's a completely different understanding of this verse. So when he says V'itna el Kohanim b'nei Levi, shemiyada mikabla hamelech, the king accepted it from their hands. And he took it from them. And well, so what does it mean keeps? That's not necessarily.
Every 7 years you get a move,
No, it was that same one. It was this same one that Moshe wrote that the king would read from, and they would take it back, and then they'd give it to him 7 years later to the next king. But yes, but they were the ones who were the guardians of it, and that's what the Sforno takes some pains to describe in some detail in his commentary, and so now we're up to the rest of the mitzvah of hakhel, the famous parts of the mitzvah of hakhel. Yeah, So remember hakhel et ha'am. All of the people were gathered together. Hanashim, v'hataf, men, women, babies. By the way, the ger here does not mean convert. It means the non-Jews who lived in Israel, who took upon themselves the 7 mitzvah b'nei Noach. Leman yishmu, so that they would hear. Leman yilamandu, so that they will learn. V'yirau et Hashem Elokechem, so they would fear Hashem their God. V'shamru la'asot et kol divrei haTorah, so that they would keep and perform all of the words of this Torah. And your children, in other words, the children of the people who are listening to this, right? Asher lo yadu, who have not heard, yishmu yilamdu, they will hear and they will learn. Yiruat Hashem Elokechem, and they will fear Hashem their God. Kol yamim, all their days. Asher atem chaim al hadama, asher atem ovrim et hayarden shama l'ushta. They'll live peacefully on the land. That it doesn't say peacefully. They'll live on the land to cross the Jordan to possess it. So the next thing that the Sforno wants to know is it says Laman Yishmu, so that they will hear. Well, we already said that. So in other words, in verse 12, what did we say? Say gather the people, men, women, and children, etc., etc. They may hear, and so they learn to revere the. So, wait a minute, they're already gathered. Of course they're going to hear. The king is reading out this out loud for everybody to hear. So what does it mean that they will hear? So Sforno says, L'man yishmu yivinu chachmei ha'am. Specifically, the people who need to hear this are the Torah scholars. Torah scholars, don't they already know Torah? The chachmei ha'am. Right? These are not the Chachmei of Helm, right? These are the wise people of the generation. They already know Torah. What does it mean that they have to hear? So, to understand this, in his commentary on the Sforno, Rabbi Tolkovich explains the previous verse 11, already told us that the Torah was to be read by the king, the Aznehem, in their ears. So obviously they're going to hear. So what does it mean that they have to hear? So we're talking about another group of hearing, another group of listening. Everybody can hear something, but the Torah scholars, when they hear something, they're learning, they're thinking into it, they're gathering more than just hearing words. Right, so everybody's going to hear the words, and that's already something. That's already somewhat inspirational. That's already something that they can gather. But those people who are the Chachmei Yisrael, the wise people of the Jewish people, when they hear something, they're looking into it. They're thinking about it in a deeper way, and they too need to come. And that's the point. It's not enough that everybody's just there. They have to leave their lessons, they have to leave their chavrutot, they have to leave their classes that they're giving, and they have to go listen to this lecture too, even though they know this stuff already. This is basic, this is elementary for them. And that's what this Sforno is trying to say here. All right, and the last verse that we have time to go over here is again chapter 31. All of Vayelech is chapter 31. So verses 17 and 18, Yud Zayin and Yud Chet, V'chara api bo bayom. So this is already talking about if the Jewish people don't listen to Hashem, he's going to hide himself. He's going to make it so that it's harder to see his providence in the world. And obviously he's always in the world, but it's going to be harder to see him. V'chara api bo bayom. I'll be upset with the Jewish people in that day. And I will hide my face, mehem, v'hayel le'achol mitzauhu ra'ot rabo v'tzarot, v'amar bayom hahu halo al kain elokei so elokai b'kirbi mitzani hara'ot ha'ela. So I'm going to forsake them. I'm going to hide my face from them, and all of these evils are going to come upon them because they're going to say Hashem is not amongst them, is not with me. I will hide my face surely on that day. Al kol hara she'asa ki pana el Elohim acherim. Elohim acherim should be. So because they turn to other gods, and therefore I will hide my face from them. See, Safari made a mistake. They wrote Elohim. It should be Elohim here. It's not God's name. Anyway, other gods. So so what does it mean? How is Hashem going to hide his face? By the way, there's a number of ways to understand this. What the Sforno says here is Va'azavtim. Va'azavtim means biyad chacharive habayit v'yigvuru alehem. So into the hands of the people. And to the people who destroyed the temple, into their hands will I give over the Jewish people. And then I'll hide mehem, and then I will hide my face from them. So he says, after they will be given over to those people, after the other nations are treating them poorly, right? At that point, I'm going to not show my mercy on them, as if I don't see them, as if I don't see their problems. So obviously he sees our problems, and obviously he cares, but he's going to sort of obviously we're not talking about Hashem having a real face. This is all metaphor. Thank you. He doesn't have a body, he doesn't have a face. So when he turns his face, it's like people when they turn their face from something, right? When we try not to look at something, he's going to act as if he's not looking. Now, obviously, he's always there, and obviously he cares, but he's going to act like he doesn't because we're saying he's not there. So the punishment for that is you think I'm not there, so I will act like I'm not there. So says the Sforno, what he's really saying is this expression means that he's concealing his face, which is the removal of this mercy on the Jewish people. There's always this mercy like hovering over us, protecting us, and that's going to leave. And when that leaves, we're going to feel a lack. We're going to feel the lack of the Shekhinah, and that's what's going to bring us into the exile. The Shekhinah is always with us. It says in the Gemara, the Shekhinah went with us into exile, but we don't always feel it. That feeling isn't always there, and the reason we don't feel it is because we've done things that have separated us from that feeling, from that natural feeling of that holiness that Hashem is inspiring into us. And when we don't feel the Shekhinah, what ends up happening is we feel like he's not there, and it becomes a cycle. And we have to, at that point, the real teshuvah happens when we realize that, and we fight that feeling and try to feel Hashem's presence even when it's hard to feel. And when we do that, when that comes from our end, that's when Hashem lets us individually feel the Shekhinah in a way that will hopefully bring it into a way that the entire nation can then feel the Shekhinah. And that's the goal of Teshuvah, and that's one of the goals that we have right now in these days. I'm going to stop the live share now on Facebook and stop the recording. Unfortunately,